I don't know how I arrived in the elevator. I recall nothing about the moments before. I knew that the day had been a normal one, at least up to where I found myself in the cramped, mildew-smelling and dimly lit elevator. But I couldn't, no matter how hard I tried, recall what I'd been doing in the moments prior to being exactly here. In the way of dreams, I felt no panic. The blank space in my memory made me more curious than afraid. I felt disconnected from the situation in a way that I have only ever experienced in dreams. The how simply didn't matter. All that mattered was that I was here and I needed to act. That thought seemed to trigger something. The elevator jerked and rattled to life, the movement sending me stumbling into a wall. Regaining my footing, I wiped my hands on my jeans. The motion of the elevator ceased and the buttons next to the door flared to bright life. There were 4 floors to the building. Buttons 1, 2 and 3 were yellow. Button 4 was red. I assumed that this meant that I was on floor 4, and when nothing further happened, I pushed the door open button. The doors opened slowly, sticking and struggling to complete the task. When they opened enough, I peered through. The place I was peering into was an immense theatre. Rows upon rows of seats ran across the slanted floor, with several narrow passages between them to allow people to come and go. All of the seats were full, and the low hubbub of chatter was excited. The energy in the room was contagious, and despite not knowing where I was, I tried to step out of the elevator, eager to see what the fuss was about. But as I stepped forward, I hit a barrier. I could see and hear what was going on outside of the elevator, but I couldn't step beyond the opened doors. The house lights lowered and the noise fell with it. A single spotlight illuminated the stage, and I heard slow, deliberate footsteps as somebody walked out into the light. "Welcome," a female voice called out, "and thank you for coming." I started at the words. The voice speaking them was my own. The speaker stepped into the light and set the bottle of water down at her feet. Straightening back up, she beamed at her audience. It was me, but also not me. The woman on the stage was 20 years my senior, with greying hair and distinct smile lines at the corners of her eyes. She started speaking to the room, but I was too focused on her appearance to take in what she was saying. She gestured with her hands as she spoke, thin but energetic and dressed in expensive-looking but simple clothing. She radiated confidence, success and grace. I heard a rumble from the elevator around me, and the space between the doors shimmered, as if the air was suddenly hot before stilling again. I reached out, and where before there had been a barrier, now there was just air. I could leave if I wished. "It's so lovely to see many of you here this evening," the other me said from the stage, still smiling and looking for all the world like the stage was the most comfortable place she could be. "To think my book has touched so many lives, has helped so many people find their way in the world. It's something I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams." Other me had written a book, a well-known and influential one given the size of the audience. I'd always wanted to be a writer. "It makes all the sacrifice," the other me continued, but the elevator doors started to close. Then again, in the way of dreams, I knew that if I stepped out of the elevator now, this would be my life. I would become the other me standing on that stage, calm, confident, but also very alone. In this room filled with people, she was completely isolated. Did I want that? Did I want to be alone on a pedestal? The thought made me nauseous. But she was smiling. Perhaps I wanted that. I had seconds to decide. "Wait!" I snapped and put my hand on the closing doors, expecting them to stop their advance, but they did not. I snatched my hand back before I could lose my fingers to the doors and watched as a life I didn't know if I wanted disappeared behind them. The number 4 on the button control turned black, and the elevator moved again. the same jerky motion as before. I took a moment to look around my tiny prison and noticed a clock on the wall, its hands rapidly spinning clockwise. Subtle, I muttered as the elevator bumped to a stop and the doors struggled to open once again. When they had opened wide enough, I could see a long white room, the walls lined with beds, all facing into the room. It was a hospital ward. As I puzzled, I heard the clack of hard shoes on the tiled floor and blinked in surprise as an older me came around the corner into the room at a very brisk pace. Several younger people followed her, all dressed in the typical white coats and scrubs of junior doctors. Other me again had greying hair, but this time it was pulled back into a severe ponytail. Her shoes had a modest, sensible heel, and the dress under her long coat was plain, but looked expensive. She wore dark-rimmed glasses and had a harassed expression. When she stopped, her followers stopped behind her, at the foot of a bed of an elderly gentleman. "Mr. Watts presented with confusion and a raised white cell count," she said firmly. "Infection?" one girl said, looking terrified. Other me stared at her for a long moment. "And?" she snapped. "What kind of infection?" The girl looked at the floor. "Perhaps let me finish next time," Other me said firmly. "He has a history of urine infection, but has tested negative for urine protein on this occasion." Other me was interrupted again, but this time by the bang and burst of colour outside. Fireworks! The nursing staff on the ward headed over to the window. The junior doctors followed. Other me did not. I watched her as she stood alone next to the bedside, frowning at those at the windows. "You should go and look too, Doc. It's only the beginning of the year once," Mr. Watts said from his bedside. "Nonsense," Other me said. "It happens every year. If I'd spent my time engaging in such, then I wouldn't be where I am now." I frowned at that comment and really looked at the other me. She was very thin under the coat and her glasses hid dark circles under her eyes. The elevator shuddered again, dispelling the barrier. Did I want to be a well-respected doctor? Exhausted and spending years glaring at those trying to make the best of it. Exhausted and cruel. I felt no urge to stop the doors as they closed this time. I didn't want success at that price. I didn't want to lose who I was. The button for floor 3 turned black, and the elevator started its motion again. Looking at the buttons, I wondered to myself if I could go back. Absently, I pushed the blackened number 4, but the elevator kept moving. No, it seemed unless I acted, then I could not go back. But I didn't know what the other floors would hold. What if I picked something and the next floor held something better? What if I should have taken the doctor's life? Perhaps I'd just witnessed a bad day. Maybe the doctor wasn't just cruel and exhausted. Christmas is a busy time for those in the medical profession. Dr. Me was just tired. What if Writer Me hadn't been so alone? What if she had a family and friends waiting at the sides of the stage, or in the audience cheering her on and supporting her? What if the feeling of isolation I got from her was just my own fear? What if I'd already missed my best life? What if fear stopped me from taking that step and my fear was unfounded? What would happen if I never took that step? The elevator jerked to a stop and I took a deep breath. I would try to view what was behind these doors objectively. I glanced at the clock on the wall, still spinning madly forward. The doors opened slowly, and I peered out into a kitchen. I looked for the other me and spotted her sitting at a dining table. She wore an oversized jumper, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, and looked frazzled and thin. She was looking over what I assumed were bills. I recognised the logo of several utility providers and recognised the look of concern on other me from the one my mother had worn often. Footsteps pulled my gaze away from other me. A man walked into the kitchen, an infant boy under one arm and a preteen girl following behind. He put the toddler into the high chair and nudged the girl towards the table. He said nothing to other me. "Hello, sweetie." Other me smiled at the toddler. "Let's get your breakfast." want breakfast, Mummy?" the girl called. "I'm sure you do." Other me pulled cereal out of the cupboard and set about prepping breakfast for the children, while the silent man helped himself to coffee. I watched them blatantly ignore each other while getting ready for the day ahead. The man left silently, and when the front door closed, Other me let out a long sigh. "Daddy's mad again," the young girl said around a mouthful of cornflakes. "Chew your food, sweetie," Other me said. "And Daddy's okay. He's not mad at you, he's mad at Mummy. But don't worry, we'll sort it out." Other me sat down and started feeding breakfast to the toddler. "Daddy's always mad," the girl said. "It might seem that way," Other me said. I had the distinct impression that the young girl was not exaggerating. "But don't worry." "He said Mummy spends all the money," the girl said. I didn't miss the look of annoyance that flashed over Other me. "Daddy shouldn't be saying anything to you." "Oh, he didn't. He said it to Stacey." And who is Stacey?" "Stacey's in Daddy's car a lot. She and Daddy are good friends." The girl's words were innocent, and she missed the look of devastation that washed over the Other me. "Just like Mandy," the girl continued. "Daddy said that you made Mandy go away because you didn't like her, so he told me not to tell you about Stacey." The girl looked suddenly worried for a moment. "Oh, but please don't tell Daddy I told you about her. I didn't mean to." "No, I won't, sweetheart. Now come on. It's time to get you ready for school." The elevator rumbled, and I tried to think objectively. This life certainly seemed to have its problem, but the children seemed wonderful. The little boy had smiled through the entire morning, and the girl had been so bright. But could I bear living in a marriage as cold as that? Why hadn't I left a man who brought his mistresses to pick up his kids and told them not to tell Mummy? What made me want to live like that? Was it just the children, or was there something else? Did I want that? I stepped back away from the doors. I swallowed the lump in my throat as the doors closed. There was only one floor left. Was this my last choice? My last chance? What if it was awful? What if I never left this elevator? Was I doomed to a life of indecision? Or what if I picked one of these paths knowing full well what I could have had? What if I got halfway down the path before I realised it was the wrong one? The clock on the wall span faster and faster as the elevator continued to move. We hit the next floor with a jolt hard enough to make me lose my footing. I yelped as pain flashed at my ankle, but got back to my feet. The doors opened into blackness. I stared into it, hoping to see something. Anything. A strobe of pink light flashed across the floor, followed momentarily by a blue light. Then a low, thunderous bass started. I could smell the alcohol, the sweat and cigarette smoke. This was a nightclub. What was I doing in a nightclub? It took me longer than it had before to spot the Other me, standing alone at the bar, wearing a dress that didn't quite fit. The same way my clothes now never fit. They're either just a tad too baggy or a tad too tight. She sipped a tall, clear drink and was very obviously drunk. She finished the drink in a smooth motion and moved across the dance floor. I watched her for a long moment, watched people edge away from her, heard them whisper and jeer. I knew then that this was the me that would happen if I did nothing. Nothing in my life would change if I stood still. I'd still be making the same mistakes in my 40s that I was now in my 20s. I froze when the music stopped and Other me stopped her drunken swaying. She stood perfectly still and looked directly at me in the silence. "Don't let me become this," she said. I backpedaled so hard that I hit the wall of the elevator. Other me staggered towards me, screaming, "How could you let me become this? We had so much potential." "I'm sorry," I screamed back at her. "You missed every opportunity," she sobbed as she reached the elevator, no more able to pass through the invisible barrier than I was. She sank to her knees. "You missed all of them. You let me become